Thanks so much for having us today.
All right, Whitney.
Let me grab this slide thing. Sorry,
Yeah.
that part.
Hey, everyone. Zack Schroll, lead global consumer, really for Eli Lilly across our business insights and analytics group. Excited to talk to you today about kind of TV measurement and how we're approaching it with all the rapid changes that we're seeing in the marketplace with consumer behaviors.
That's exactly right. So just to set the landscape a little bit, if you're not familiar, which you probably are, but Pharma is a real powerhouse in video. TV landscape obviously has significant spend, impressions. The number of brands that are active over the course of the last 8 months has been about 300. So that's a significant growth year over year with new brands coming into market, various things happening. So it's definitely a testament to Pharma believing that TV is an essential channel, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. And this is where it gets interesting. So what we've seen consistently over the last 8 months is that ad spend has been up significantly, so 12.7%, whereas impressions have been down, meaning that fewer impressions are being purchased basically for more money, signaling advertisers, certainly these pharma brands want to prioritize quality over quantity. So what does that really mean? If we take a look at linear specifically, so this is taking a look at the pharma specific brands within linear. Just in the first half of this year, we saw about $3 billion in spend, which equates to, again, a 13.5 share of voice, volume of significant 200 plus billion household impressions, which is a share of 6% share of voice. That's really indicating, again, brands are willing to pay a premium to reach those linear viewers. And there's a real strategic need and challenge to really try to maximize and find efficiencies in reaching these audiences. So Zach, based on that, how do you think the linear TV channel really remains critical for Lilly?
Yeah, I would say linear has always been extremely critical for pharma brands, and traditionally they've skewed way more on linear than digital properties. I think it comes down to the sight, sound, and motion, obviously, of TV being extremely impactful for a communication medium. But pharma brands are complex, right? And I think the other thing that we'll talk a little bit about with challenges, and I usually mention this with new marketers or interns or folks that come through the doors, we always start at 0%. In my previous life working at Adidas, I didn't have this issue. We had 98% awareness. I didn't have to necessarily worry about establishing the brand necessarily. I had to focus on brand love, right, or NPS or other metrics. Here you're always starting from zero. And so linear being a very powerful device, and traditionally we looked at it as linear. Now we're looking at it as a TV screen in general, which I know we'll talk about. But I think that's one of the most important reasons. And then when you think about the spend and the difference between impression share, right, and spend share, a lot of it has to do with, right, the fair balance. And obviously there's benefits as well as risks and safety that need to be communicated in the messaging for medicines and across pharma companies. And so that's where you'll see longer formats than traditional, right, for other categories. And so that also drives a considerable difference. All right, so you've got the attention dynamic of linear TV and a little bit more premium, but you've also got the dimension of typically you'll have longer format ads to make sure that you can communicate the safety required as well.
Great, and that's a great segue. We wanted to also not only talk about TV, but talk specifically about pharma challenges. They have obviously some unique challenges specific to this industry and vertical. So from regulatory hurdles, which you kind of already mentioned, to patent expirations, how do these industry-specific factors influence your ad strategy, specifically on video, and how do you ensure your measurement approach accounts for these complexities?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is you have a very small window, right, of when you'll be promoting or supporting a brand before hopefully you're out innovated by a competitor, right, and there's new medicines and treatments available for patients that are even better, right? So you're not talking about decades, right, of advertising or building brands. You're talking about shorter periods of time, 3 to 6 years, hopefully, right, for some of the brands. And so with this really short period of time, you need to make sure that your measurement is dialed, and there's so much planning, right, and R&D and then time and investment that goes in before you launch, that measurement really needs to be ready from the time you start with the launches of our brands overall as well. So again, like that 0% awareness is real, and you need to really focus on doubling down and cueing that reach quickly.
Awesome. I know we've talked all about, over the course of the last few days, about streaming and just the fragmentation of the consumer viewing within the streaming and linear environment. We've obviously seen consumer behaviors changing quite a bit it's really accelerated over the last little bit here. So from your perspective, how has this fragmentation specifically impacted your ability to effectively reach and engage with your audience?
Yeah, so we follow the consumer, right? I mean, we are not looking necessarily at linear and streaming in isolation anymore. We're focusing a lot on the TV screen in general, right? And how do we most effectively reach the target patients and consumers with our messages across that screen, which is vital, right, for communicating the complex messages. With the change, like it's really a rapid change, right? I think a lot of us hopefully are keeping an eye on the trends month over month, and now streaming has more time spent than linear TV, right? So this trend is really one that has exploded this year with way more ad-supported opportunities, which was a barrier, in years past, that now those barriers are gone, and you do have great ad opportunities that exist across streaming as well. So I think the evolution for us is we need to make sure that we're keeping up, right? And so as the consumer shifts screens, we need to make sure that we're measuring both screens and not just defaulting to linear because that's what we're used to. We need to make sure that we have the right measurement partners and solutions available to make good strategic decisions across platforms to account for it.
Great. So in terms of adjustments to your strategy, is there anything else that you think that you've made over the course of the last, few years that have really accounted for this changing behavior? Again, what you've already touched upon.
Yeah, I mean, I think the change in behavior is not just looking back, and I think, again, I started my career in media and used all of the tools, right, for consumption behaviors. Typically, you're always looking back, right? You're looking, okay, well, what was behaviors last year and the previous survey the last 2 years? You can't really do that with a rapid change, right? So I think it's always about leveraging our agency and media partners as well to predict where we're going in the future and not necessarily just making your decisions based off of what had happened historically. So I think a lot of it is a blend of understanding, yes, what has happened historically, but you also have to think a lot more about how the fragmentation is going to impact the next year or the year that we're actually planning for, and do a little bit of prediction and forecasting for it as well.
Great. All right. Before we get into each of these specific things, I know we've specifically talked about just evolution of measurement. You've touched upon it a little bit already. In terms of key performance indicators, what would you say are the priority? What matters most when you're thinking about measuring a successful video campaign?
Yeah, I think, we start in terms of measurement, certainly with a really strong measurement foundation and framework. We've had a consistent framework, right, and partnerships with key partners across the industry. Probably 3 years, we haven't changed it that much. There's been some disruption across privacy and other things that have forced some adaptation and changes. But it all comes down to, obviously, we're going to look at impact, right? So what is the business impact? Are we driving revenue, and are we driving interest in our brands? That would lead us to believe that we're going to be able to hit our goals or deliver against plan that we have for any given year. So typically it's going to come down to impact, number one, but then also having those leading measures are really important for us to actually drive optimizations. And we need to have those across, linear TV. Yeah, we are optimizing, right, across linear TV as well as OTT and digital, but that robust measurement framework across leading metrics that your media teams, right, or your agency partners can leverage and adjust. And then the larger questions, right, that we deal with our CFO, right, or other folks in terms of brand leaders of channel optimization, right? So we kind of divide those out to make sure, obviously, teams have jobs to be done, but we are very focused with our team on business impact more than anything.
In terms of a world with a mix of data sources, how do you ensure that you're using a single source?
I think that comes back to the measurement framework, right? I think historically, before as an organization, we had a center of excellence, right, where we established a lot of these frameworks. It was definitely siloed, right, and disparate, and people had different measurement solutions, different frameworks. We are very structured and have created a really good approach in terms of our marketers understanding exactly what that measurement framework is, our leadership understanding what that measurement framework, and our agency partners. So when agency partners come back with recommendations, it's not based off of necessarily their media metrics. That's great for some optimizations, but if we're thinking about monthly optimizations or quarterly optimizations, we're very focused and everyone's on the same page. So again, that communication and making sure that you really walk your partners, not just your team on the analytics side or not just your media or marketing team, but also your agency partners to make sure that they are also, when you're in market, making the changes that are needed to drive business impact.
Great. Talking about channel balancing here for a moment, again, touched upon it a little bit already, but how do you achieve a balance between those two strategies, the linear and the streaming strategies, and what role does data play in that blend?
I think knowing how we approach it is going to be dependent on data, right? The data has to tell us, we've got obviously consumer behavior, but also what are we seeing from our investments in terms of reach and frequency. Again, it's not just a linear thing, it is linear and OTT. How are we balancing and can we match, right, with those ad-supported opportunities, the blend of investment across both of those platforms when we think about streaming? And again, unified measurement is something that we've partnered on with you guys at iSpot for several years now. And the interesting piece is we've seen quite a change, right, in terms of what streaming can deliver versus what it could deliver 3-4 years ago, right, or even pre-COVID, where as a company, we were very much leaning into digital first, even before COVID. Obviously, there was some acceleration that had happened, but now the ad-supported opportunities have caught up, right? And I think that's the biggest change and the biggest reason that's driving the even more significant importance. And I don't know how many people watched the NFL on YouTube last week as an example, right? I mean, we've got Amazon Prime Thursday games. So the sports programming moving over, as well as a lot more ad opportunities that exist this year, are really matching consumer behavior with the ad-supported opportunities to go along with it.
Wonderful. Can you elaborate on the process of implementing this unified measurement approach? What are some of the key internal challenges or aha moments that you've had? You mentioned a little bit about sports.
Yeah, the biggest aha moment to me is, I think early on, when we wanted to be digital first, right, and we wanted to focus on making sure we reach consumers across digital touch points, the reach, especially across streaming, wasn't there, right? So you had a disproportional amount of frequency versus reach with a lot of the publishers. Over time, and certainly this year, the aha moment is that shift has happened, right? Like it is now more of a 50-50 split between the incremental, right? When we're looking at reach across OTT and TV and the incremental reach, it actually warrants, right, the investment shift alongside it, where for the last several years, as we've been monitoring it, transparently a little disappointed, right, in terms of the reach that came along, again, because the ad-supported opportunities hadn't necessarily caught up. I think now with the tipping point that you're seeing in consumption, but also the ad-supported opportunities, the data is really, you look at the data and it looks significantly different than we have historically. As well as I think a lot of the opportunities with the unified measurement piece, when we think about some of the challenges that you've potentially had with reach and frequency. Okay, well, here's NBC reach, right? If we're doing a partnership like we sponsor the Olympics, that's great. It's NBC, but the Olympics is on multiple programs, right? Then you've got Peacock, right? And your digital platforms as well. I want to know what the Olympics delivered. I don't want to know what NBC delivered. I want to know across all properties, what did that Olympic buy deliver? And so unified measurement becomes really important for us to group those together, but also look at the incremental reach associated with that, because obviously in some of those instances, you're certainly paying a premium, right? So you're gonna wanna get incremental reach out of it.
Awesome. So we set the stage with how large or a powerhouse Pharma is. How important is it for Lilly to track not only your performance, but that of your top competitors across linear and streaming?
I would say linear has always been the gold standard. I mean, 20 plus years, I've always got the same questions from leaders at any company, right, that I've worked for. Everyone expects digital competitive to be better. It's always been pretty much garbage, right, across the board. It's like it's not even worth looking at. I would say TV and linear competitive has always been the gold standard, right? Like airings level data, you can get all the information on competitors, you can get share of voice, you can do modeling work off of it as well, if you want to include some of that data into your MMMs as an example. So I think linear is really good, but OTT was lacking. All right, and I think that's really the benefit. And again, I think kudos to iSpot on the OTT and streaming competitive that's now available. Right, it gives us a different view and brings us some more confidence in measuring competitive share of voice and competitive presence across, again, different publishers in a similar way that we do with networks, right, or programming across linear TV. So I think that's the biggest change for us. Is the really understanding the competitive behavior. Again, it always goes back to that TV screen, right? I don't want to only isolate and say, well, this is what's done on linear, because then it's a linear conversation with marketers about, oh, well, my share of voice on linear isn't good. That's great. We need to look at across the board. We need to blend and look at TV and OTT and be confident in what we're reporting back to give our partners confidence as well of what our actual share of voice is across those platforms. And again, I wish digital would catch up, but I mean, if someone has a solution, let me know after.
At least a piece of it is nothing, nothing to sneeze at. Okay, great. In terms of managing frequency, we talked a lot about reach. However, how does Lilly's use of iSpot's unified measurement allow you to effectively manage frequency across the variety of publishers and platforms within the space? And I'll ask a follow-up question, why is this deduplicated view so critical?
Yeah, I think it's really important for depending on the role, right? So for our media or our agency partners, I think it's really important for them to understand, obviously, the reach and frequency that each partner is delivering, right, as part of our buy. From our end, with my team or the business integration teams that really support the insights for the brands, right, and the marketers, for them, it's really about the total, right? Like, and we care more about the channel, right, level views and optimizations, where our media partners are going to be really held accountable for how do I make the optimizations. And if I'm paying a premium for one network and there's no unique reach associated to it, then why am I doing that? And so I think we look across, obviously, reach and frequency to help balance that. But we're also looking across some other lagging metrics, right, that we have as well to kind of reconcile that beyond, again, whether we're talking about other impact measures. But I think the combination of those things are really important. And for us, it's really important at a channel level.
Great. Finally, we're joking, we could talk about this all day. Creative consideration. So how do you keep a pulse on creative wear? How does that translate to actionable insights for media and creative teams? And what does that data tell you about when it's time to potentially change out creative?
Yeah, so creative is probably my favorite topic. I mean, obviously I love reach and frequency, but I think the last several years, creative's been kind of a passion of us trying to understand. At some point, we can deliver as much reach and frequency as we want, but we're not seeing the impact, right, potentially. And a lot of that comes down to the creative, right? Depending on sources, you're going to say creative impact is upwards of 50 to 60% of the total impact that you're going to have. And so we've spent a lot of time really thinking about, well, how do we approach creative? How do we give information back to our business partners and marketers to know when to make optimizations, right, or iterations, because they're not getting the most out of that individual creative. I think it's funny, for some of you probably have heard, like, Mark Ritzen's gone on a tour starting in like June, right, with his data that he's done with System 1 on there's no such thing as wear out. there's no such thing as wear out, right? If you have an amazing campaign and you're launching the Coke, polar bears, yes, that's always going to work. Unfortunately, that's not what most of us deal with, right? 95% of the ads can't actually necessarily say that. So we are really interested, right, in understanding when we're losing effectiveness of those ads over time. And so that becomes really important for us to give feedback to really to our marketers. And we're tracking that monthly, right, and triangulating a couple of different metrics to understand, are we performing up to expectations? How are we comparing to our previous creative? How do you compare to your competitors, right? So a lot of this, because we can look at reach and frequency, but we also need what's the creative impact associated to it to really figure out, okay, well, how hard is that reach and frequency working for you? So creative, again, I would say is probably the most interesting space because I think there's a lot of defining still going on in there and how you incorporate the creative part of it. And again, it's really challenging with pharma based off of, I think, the regulations that we talked about. We don't, again, especially when we think about like distinctive brand assets and building brands, there's not too many pharma companies, right, that you can, off the top of your head, remember, oh, this is a distinctive asset. Again, any of them that do have distinctive assets, Saturday Night Live is probably spoofed, right? So like you've got, Ozempic or Jardiance as great examples, right? But for a Lilly, we had Cialis in the bathtubs historically, right? So again, I think the distinctive kind of asset piece of it is an interesting one. That is a space that we're trying to certainly dive into and learn a little bit more about, right? Kind of in the future, because again, with attention being just so short, right, today, even though the TV screen is amazing, right, and we want to be on the largest screen in the room, you have to consider the attention, right, of that creative is able to generate, not just the format that the creative is running on.
Awesome. I think we have some time for questions.